This is Felipe Noguera for Making a Difference. We are at the Trinidad Hilton on the occasion of the Emancipation Trade Forum, Emancipation Support Committee's Trade Forum. The topic is forging new commercial partnerships between Nigeria and Trinidad and Tobago. And we're very pleased to speak with Mr. David Commissiong. Brother David is a prominent lawyer from Barbados. He is the leader of the Clement Payne movement, a social movement NGO in Barbados. He's the past chairman of the Pan-African Commission of Barbados, and he's the current leader of the Reparations Commission of Barbados.
No, I'm a member of the Barbados government's National Task Force on Reparations. National
Task Force on Reparations. Thanks for the clarification. And also, David is the chairman of the Caribbean Pan-African Network.
That's correct. Yes. Good.
Thanks for agreeing to speak with us, David. And we just want to talk about the significance of the statement, the declaration recently by CARICOM heads of government, that they are going to be they're going to be establishing a reparations commission on CARICOM, within CARICOM, to pursue reparations for the indigenous people who were subject to genocide, and to the descendants of enslaved Africans who also had genocidal challenges as well as forced labor for hundreds of years, for centuries. The question that we have is, how do we implement this declaration by CARICOM heads, and how do we get the former slave prosecuting countries, those who perpetrated the slave trade, to comply with the demand for reparations?
Well, first of all, we need to really congratulate our CARICOM heads of government for taking this very momentous step, although we need to acknowledge that it is really the culmination of a process that we in the Caribbean have been engaged in for some time. In fact, significant steps in that process would be the work of the late Dudley Thompson, working with the Chief Moshood Abiola of Nigeria, and ultimately the OAU, Organization of African Unity.
Professor Ali Mazuri, I think, is also on that commission.
Yeah, to establish the group of eminent persons on reparations, the OAU's Reparations Commission, and so forth. Then we fast forward to the work done by Caribbean governments and civil society activists at the UN World Conference Against Racism in 2001, where the Caribbean was responsible for piloting several resolutions that were passed at that conference, pointing towards the legitimacy of reparations for the people of Africa and the African diaspora. We fast forward a few years later to the government of Jamaica establishing a national commission on reparations, the government of Antigua establishing a reparations support commission, the government of Barbados in November of last year establishing a national task force on reparations.
It still remains for us in Trinidad and Tobago to establish a national task force on reparations.
Yeah, but the significance of the recent CARICOM decision is that the heads of government have mandated every CARICOM member state to establish a national commission or task force. So hopefully the Trinidad government will soon be implementing that heads of government decision. And of course they have gone beyond that to establish a CARICOM commission, and we expect to have the first meeting of that commission in September in St. Vincent. The structure that they have put in place is a very efficient structure. The commission will consist of the chairpersons of each of the national commissions, plus 5 heads of government, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the Prime Minister of Barbados, the Prime Minister of Jamaica, the Prime Minister of Suriname, Haiti, and the current chairman of CARICOM, which will be Trinidad and Tobago at this stage. The Prime Minister of Barbados will chair the commission. So this is a very progressive move. They also have requested the University of the West Indies to establish a reparations research unit in the university. So this is very progressive.
The question is, how, having taken the policy, will we implement it in such a way, or is it conceptualized to implement it in such a way that the people who are the poorest, who are the most oppressed, the most discriminated against, are able to achieve tangible benefits without being ripped off again?
Well, I said that the recent initiative of CARICOM is to be lauded, but it comes with some dangers. You know, it comes with, and one of the dangers is that when you get that kind of high-level governmental body, one of the dangers is that they could easily just run away with the issue and compromise
it for their own purposes.
Compromise it. So with an issue as sacred as this is an issue that comes out of 500 years of a tortured history.
And of struggle against that
yes,
oppression.
It's a sacred issue. And it's an issue that belongs to all of our people, all African people, all of the sons and daughters of Africa. So what we have to ensure, those of us who have been reparations activists for many years, who are members of these national task forces and so forth, what we have to ensure is that a process is put in place in which we now take the issue to the broad masses of our people. In other words, no CARICOM commission should be running off and seek to make some, you know, very quick settlement with the governments of Europe. No. We must have a broad, extensive consultation with the people of the Caribbean, because one of the critical issues is what form will these reparations take? You know, and that's a very critical issue on which the masses of people must be consulted.
And they must weigh in.
Yes,
but the only way they can weigh in is if they are informed, they are educated about the implications of the issue, and that the people who are supposed to be paying this restitution, the reparations, are also made to understand that this is not simply a palliative, something
Correct.
that you can just pay off and keep quiet, but rather the reconciliation of half a millennium of oppression and slavery that is now coming full circle in terms of justice.
Yes. The way I like to put it is that when the European enslavers and merchants left Western Europe in the 15th century and went to West Africa, they found nations, societies in West Africa that, in terms of their material development, were at the very least on par with the nations of Western Europe, if not superior. Ghana. 500 years later, after 500 years of a European orchestrated and imposed criminal enterprise known as the transatlantic slave trade, after centuries of racialized chattel slavery imposed upon African people, after centuries of the rape of Africa's resources, natural as well as human, we now have this, we have gone from a state of equality or equilibrium to one of severe inequality. A big gap has opened up between the civilization of Western Europe and the civilization of Africa and its diaspora. So reparations is about restoring that equilibrium.
Some level of parity and equity.
Yes, so it can't be, and this is why I say we have to be very careful that we don't rush off and compromise the issue with some little palliative that does not address the severe injustice and the tremendous inequalities that have been inflicted on our people. The national task forces or commissions are going to have to play a very important role in instituting a broad-based grassroots type of consultation. So as far as I'm concerned, and I've said this at my most recent task force meeting in Barbados, that good, CARICOM has set up this commission, but it must be our job as a national task force to engage in broad-based consultation with the masses of the Barbadian people, and then to feed the results of that consultation into
the regional process.
So that needs to happen in Trinidad and Tobago needs to set up its task force, and the task force needs to do that kind of work. So far as Trinidad and Tobago is concerned, we don't have to strain ourselves to make a case for Trinidad and Tobago being the location for a Pan-African Congress. After all, it was Henry Sylvester Williams, a Trinidadian of Barbadian ancestry, who organized the first Pan-African Congress in 1900, and Trinidad has given birth to some of the world's greatest Pan-Africanists, not least of all George Padmore, also of Barbadian ancestry, C.L.R. James, whose grandfather was from Barbados, Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, who probably also had
was from the Virgin Islands.
ancestry. So, but yes, Trinidad and Tobago has earned the right to be the location for a Pan-African Congress, not least of all the work of the Emancipation Support Committee. I am here in Trinidad right now as a guest of the Emancipation Support Committee, and the tremendous work that they have done that is widely recognized right across the African diaspora. So yes, we would definitely support this country being the location of the next Pan-African Congress.
Thank you very much, Brother David Commissiong. Well, we're really thrilled. It's a rare treat to have the opportunity to speak with Nobel laureate, author of Death and the King's Horseman and other well-known pieces of literature from Nigeria, Professor Wole Soyinka. Professor, thanks for agreeing to spend a few minutes with us to speak to making a difference in our segment called Caribbean Diplomatic Forum. You, in your remarks, were speaking about some of the challenges that have bedeviled African unity over the years, particularly in recent history at our Pan-African Congresses. As a man of letters, as an experienced Pan-Africanist, what do you think is most essential right now to build African unity, and why is it necessary?
Well, I'm very glad that you added that other question, why is it necessary? Of course, we'll have different interpretations of what African unity means. Many people at one stage felt that unity would be meaningless if it was not based on ideological foundation. Others, for instance, would think of African unity purely in commercial terms, as once we have a kind of common market in which we produced, marketed, distributed in our continent. That is African unity. Others think that African unity is incomplete if it does not include Africa overseas, and believe that very passionately. Hence movements like Pan-Africanism, which is supposed to be not merely recovery of history, reestablishment of cultural links, political associations, a position of Africa vis-a-vis the rest. So part of what has bedeviled African unity has been, in fact, the multiplicity of interpretation of what that unity consists of. Why should it be necessary? That's why I stressed the second part of your question. And of course, personality cult has come into it. Personality cult, which builds up factions around individuals rather than peoples, organic associations of peoples, pre-colonial structures, some of which are definitely still valid and important alternatives, for African continent.
Do you think, thank you, do you think that the question of reparations, which you addressed to some extent during your discourse, is one around which Africa and the African diaspora can cohere and perhaps give focus to a proposed 8th Pan-African Congress, not on the continent this time, but in the diaspora in Trinidad and Tobago in 2015?
It's a useful tool, reparations, to keep reminding the external world of the harm, the damage they've done to the African continent, the African peoples, the racism, the imperialist venture into Africa, the indentureship of an entire continent to the needs, commercial needs, production needs, cultural arrogance of the rest of the world. It's useful for me, but largely as academic discourse. We cannot plan Africa's future around the notion of reparations. No.
Okay, but in terms of the broader diasporan question of unity, the inclusion of the Africans who live in Brazil, in South America, those more than 200,000 who live in China, in India, the devastation, or at least the assault against a traditional historic center of learning in Timbuktu and Mali, and the French adventure to deal with the Islamists, all of these beg concerted attention and effort on the part of Africa and Africans to focus and to attempt to address in a constructive and meaningful way. But given the wide variety of issues that call for urgent attention, how do we allow this or facilitate the unity so that when we come together, we do have some tangible issues around which we can concentrate and try and result in something that is meaningful for all of our people and not just the intellectuals or the elite?
Okay. My usual take on this is to place events which happen to us today not merely in within a geographical context, but within a historical one. And by that I mean that the situation for the African continent today is not the same as during colonial times. It's not the same as during the pre-colonial period when most of Africa, was not even aware of the existence of some other peoples, nations, and so on, in which there was a cohesive, even though with problems here and there, but there was at least a cohesive kind of organic society which was evolving the same way as other societies evolved. We've been through the experience, for instance, of an ideological split of the African continent, East and West, Soviet bloc, capitalist, Western bloc, etc., etc.
Socialist, non-aligned.
Socialist, the whole lot, which for decades have prevented us focusing on what Africa really needs, what Africa means to us. We've seen Africa in relation to others. And there are certain deeply ingrained attitudes which have become vitiated by what's happening to us today. I'm very glad you mentioned the issue of Mali and the French intervention there. Well, was French intervention negative or positive? These are questions which one cannot answer along the old parameters. We had a very aggressive, iconoclastic and barbaric invasion of Mali by forces which were both African, Arab, religion impelled, but certainly very antagonistic to the African heritage and African possibilities.
And our culture and civilization.
Culture, the whole lot, inimical to it. And so I very personally not only applauded French intervention, but had, in my own way, in many areas, attempted to ginger up African nations to be the first to intervene.
So that the African Union could have had its peacekeeping forces.
Absolutely, they should have been on the ground. But every day that passed made the task increasingly difficult. And so for me, I didn't care if the devil came down from hell to chase those people out, with their tail behind their legs. I was quite happy about that. So now we find our interests, and when we think of Africa, we find our interests very complicated. Our interests automatically aligned against or for the West, the Soviet bloc, or today, another complication, China. And you'll hear voices saying, beware of Chinese imperialism. But what happens if China comes and offers African people trading relations on a basis which is so congenial to Africa's future, or plans of development and so on, certainly far more beneficial to developmental ambitions in the African continent. And then people talk about imperialism. Whose imperialism? And so it's a very fascinating and also not just an academic debate, but a very propulsive one when you think of Africa's future.
Far-reaching implications.
Very far-reaching.
But what I gather from what you're saying is...
let me just agree with you that, so this was just to agree with what you said, that maybe it is time for another huge Pan-African Congress which takes cognizance of the rapidly shifting realities with the African continent. So
thank you very much, Professor. And what I gather, or what I've been able to glean from your remarks also, is that we have to begin to think with our own minds and starting with ourselves as a point of reference, and then in relationship to other peoples and other civilizations.
I agree, absolutely. It's almost like not quite going to that extreme, but drawing like the Soviet Union did, the Iron Curtain, the Chinese, the bamboo curtain. I don't know whether it's going to be a cowrie curtain, you know, for quite a while we rethink, regroup, and then plunge into the future on a very confident, self-assured basis, and that basis itself is formulated with numerous options which we take from our own history, from the valid aspects of our culture, and from even our business way of relating to one another.
Thank you. Final question, Professor Soyinka, and that is, you mentioned South-South trade during your remarks and South-South communications, and the dilemma that if we want to call from Trinidad to Tanzania, we have to go via Europe. This telecolonial apparatus has also frustrated any efforts at building Pan-African unity in a meaningful, multidimensional way, as you've been describing. Any remarks that you'd like to share with regard to the need for more autonomous communications capacity, both for the means of communication and the content, so that writers and our great cultural workers such as yourself, that those works could be shared in an unadulterated fashion?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of communications. One which has been very of great concern to me. One of the highlights of the achievement of Nigerian entrepreneurs, for instance, was the seizure of communication means by adventurous business Africans. That's one of the reasons I supported, for instance, the establishment of the Globacom communication. It's for me wonderful that I pick up my phone here today, even in these mobile days, and I see that a Nigerian company has linked up with a local company here, because what appears there is, you know, whether it's Glo or MTM these days or whatever, I don't mind, you know, what they're called. The important thing is that the initiative is being taken by a number of Africans. I remember the day in Ghana when I was invited to be present at the completion of a telecommunication cable, you know, it was between Europe and Africa. I would have liked to see it between Brazil, which is a black country as far as I'm concerned, or Trinidad or Jamaica.
You'll see it. You will see it.
I would have preferred it. But what mattered for me, at least, was that that enterprise was owned, was initiated, and was presided over by a Nigerian company. For me, it's a step in the right direction.
And it is significant in your view that Africans own their own means of communication.
Absolutely. That
and
they control it.
And the content of our communications as
yes,
well.
indeed. This is very critical.
We've been speaking with Professor Wole Soyinka, Nobel Prize winner for literature, and you've been watching Making a Difference. Thank you very much, Professor. We appreciate so much the time that you spent with us. All the best.